All right, welcome back to the Sovereignpreneur Show. Today I have Deanna with me, who is an educator in El Salvador. She goes by Classical Educator on Twitter and Noster. Maybe you've heard of her. And if not, you'll have heard a lot from her today. The first question I want to ask you before you introduce yourself, Deanna, is how many educators out there are educated about Bitcoin? And what does that mean for the next generation of our youth education?
Well, I would say that there are probably more educators than one would think that have heard of Bitcoin and know Bitcoin and have an opinion on Bitcoin. But whether or not they're actually educated in Bitcoin, I would say not very many. Because to be educated in Bitcoin means that you fully understand it technically, but also in my world, philosophically.
Okay. And how big of well, let's start over. What brought you into Bitcoin? And you have a history in education, but then what brought you into Bitcoin and how have you kind of implemented that into your vocation and career?
Okay. So it's kind of, I can remember the first time I heard about Bitcoin. It was a very long time ago. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, told me about it. We were sitting at a bench in Huntington Gardens in near LA. And he told me about this thing and my head exploded. It was the same way he said, well, there really doesn't have to be like a first mover in the origins of the universe. And I'm like, I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. Go away. And so this was in 2011. He couldn't figure out how to buy it at the time. It was this is a long time I've known about
this. Early. Yeah.
Really early, right?
Wow.
And I kind of just dismissed it, right? And I think that everybody has their own journey on how they get to Bitcoin. And so I've known about it for a long time, and he would bring it, it kind of come in and ebb and flow in our life. But I was the fiat girl. Like I grew up in a small town in California. I'm first generation college student. My parents didn't really have money to save, and I didn't grow up financially literate at all. Been really bad with money my whole life up until recently. And it's embarrassing, but I want to tell my story to help inspire other people that, yeah, you can also get here. It's okay.
Bitcoin kind of helps us get better with money. I'm noticing that about myself as well. Like getting more structured and organized, even if it just means keeping track of assets to my name in a way where it's like, well, I like to know how much Bitcoin I own to the decimal point, right? Yeah. And then that makes me almost want to stay on top of other things I don't, but it makes me want to in a way.
Well, I'm really OCD and a planner and schedule and a list maker, but money was I was never taught, right? And as humans, if we're not taught, we don't know. And it was never anything that was conscious. My parents split up and my mom was wretched with money, and that was my influence. So, that's what we learn. But over time, particularly during COVID and after, is when I really sort of woke up. And then I think I passed my husband in conviction at this point.
Like Bitcoin conviction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not toxic because I'm kind and I'm patient and but I am a maxi. And if people want to do other coins or other currencies and stuff, that's their journey and that's okay. But don't shill me. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I'm not going to go convince you to go to the casino with me, right? If you like going to gamble, we'll see each other there. But otherwise, it's like, no, you got a greater mission going on.
Absolutely. So, but now I'm 100% in. In fact, I still get paid in dirty fiat from a job that I have that I still keep in the States because El Salvador is expensive. And so it's nice to have an American income still coming in because I teach online. But so I use that dirty fiat here and I spend it, but we also try to live on a Bitcoin standard as much as possible. And I try to get paid in Bitcoin for other things.
Yeah, well, it's hard to be fully Bitcoin standard here. It's obviously easier than many other places, but it's still difficult. And it might get more difficult in the next few months here.
Yes, I know.
When did you move to El Salvador?
We moved in July of 2023. So we've been here a little over a year and a half.
Okay. And have your feelings changed at all with the latest developments in the Bitcoin legal tender and IMF stuff?
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I'm kind of don't see a lot of shades of gray. I'm kind of a black and
Pretty
white.
extreme.
Yeah. And I'm disappointed, but to me, it's to be expected from world leaders. So I'm disappointed, but not surprised, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that is almost accurately represents how I feel too. Like Bitcoin doesn't need the nation state. Bitcoin will be Bitcoin. It will suck up all the money, all that stuff. And in essence too, if a government is giving that power of money to the people, like I saw a funny tweet on it the other day and I don't remember exactly what it was, but the punchline was like, they must not have understood what they were doing because otherwise it's not a government.
Exactly. I'm a fan of circular economies. In fact, I had just helped Bitcoin Beach put together their summit for circular economies last week. And I think I'm a historian, and I'm a Roman historian. So what I'm seeing going on in the world, I'm like, oh, I read this in Gibbon. I read this in all my research, the primary sources. I feel like we're living through it. And I wanted to study it and not live it. So
like the
hard.
fall of Rome, you mean?
I'm a late antiquity scholar.
Okay, so let's jump into that. That's interesting, right? So from the very top of the funnel here, what are the similarities and correlations between the fall of our empire today and the fall of Rome?
How many hours do we have?
How basic and brief can you be?
The militarization of state.
Okay. Like to go after people the state doesn't like,
but also within the state. So the militarization,
the literal militarization.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I'm American, so I'm going to really particularly speak about the U.S. So it's the military-industrial complex, right? Rome did the same thing. If you look at it, they owned the Mediterranean. And
they own it in a lot of Europe too, like stretching out to like
all the
London,
way, yeah,
right?
and
Londinium.
to Hadrian's Wall, right? They couldn't beat the Scots. I'm like, yes, I've got some Scot in me. This is great. I'm a fighter. So they built a wall, which is again, hello. Where did that come from?
Walls.
Walls. Yeah, building a wall to keep people out.
Well, I feel like sorry to interrupt the story,
okay.
but like Game of Thrones, I feel like the wall is kind of just like a powerful metaphor in kingdoms, right?
Well, and I have a background in art history too. So if you study brutalist architecture, these, big concrete structures are really interesting. And, I could just go on all these tangents. Okay. So militarization of empire. You can look at the changing of religion. So Christianity, within 100 years, you had Christians being persecuted, and within 100 years, they're persecuting anybody who is not Christian. So you have this big shift in ideology, and you see a big shift in ideology right now, and you could call wokeism a religion. And so there's that shift, and this shift from being, sort of Christian into this it's like Christian way of being, having these alternative ideas and almost these alternative gods in a way that aren't gods in the traditional sense, but they, worship and they shun. And anybody who is not that is now being persecuted. Yes, it's on social media. Yes, it's cancel culture. It's not literally being killed, although in some cases it is. But there's a shift in ideology.
So this makes me wish Michael was here. Michael's not feeling well today, but this is right up. So idols, basically, in biblical terms, right? Do you think things have shifted with like Trump winning the election? Is wokeism still growing in power? I remember even like a year ago, people were saying we've already passed peak wokeism. It's not going to last. But regardless of the wokeism part, like as we like to say around here lately, God is dead. Nietzsche was really commenting on a lack of religious authority in society. And how long ago was that? That was a while ago that Nietzsche said that. And so society was already secularizing away from these, I guess, Western Christian ideals that built up the civilization that we have today. Now, obviously, it's gone fiat and it's going downhill, but at one point, it was a really beautiful civilization.
Yeah, so you see a shift against that of what we would call, and even a shift against, even if you weren't Christian, but having values and morals, right? So you can have values and morals without being a devout Christian or having a devout religion, because you can understand, the golden rule, do unto others. You can understand pursuit of happiness as long as it doesn't impede other people's lives. You can have those morals and values, but going away from all that into a nihilistic, and I would say the nihilism is the new religion, is the destruction.
So
Tearing down of things instead of supporting things.
So nihilism is like, would you say that's what it is? Tearing down of things instead of supporting things? Because I always thought nihilism was more like you just don't care, like it's all good, like the dude, the Big Lebowski. So
I think it goes beyond that. I think I don't want shiny things, but I also don't want you to have shiny things. So it's not only that you are jealous of your neighbor's house, you want to burn it down. Okay. And it's pretty dark.
So is that would you say that's a pretty solid and entrenched value in wokeism?
That and ambivalence I teach second graders all the way through high school every week. And to get them to show any sort of passion about anything, I teach writing. I let them write about anything they want, and nothing excites them. They have it knocked out of them so young now. The second graders a little bit still have it, but by the time they're 4th, 5th grade, these kids have had all curiosity, everything that's beautiful about being human just sucked out of them. And
so what is the cause of that, in your opinion?
Education system.
Education itself? Yeah. Do you think it has something to do with like
teachers, colleges, how they're trained, and then it just trickles downhill, right?
What about the diet, what the kids are eating at home, if they're staring at blue light screens? Do you think any of that plays a role? Yeah, all of that.
I mean, everything, but it starts with education, right? But it can start even before that. If you use an iPad as a babysitter for a 2-year-old because you can't be bothered, that's going to affect that child. There's, that human nurturing and that connection is getting broken really, really young. And that affects people. It affects children. It affects them as adults. So they don't have healthy relationships. And then in the education system, there's such a focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Okay, that's going to help them get jobs, and jobs are good. Although with AI and things coming, we'll see how that works out. But anyway, they're not focused on the humanities. And look at that word human in humanities. And so they're not reading stories. They're not learning empathy. They're not reading Dickens and say, oh, wait, Pip did this in Great Expectations. And so this is kind of like that situation, and I can draw correlations. They can't make those connections because they're not given the opportunity anymore in education. Well, so that's another breakdown. And you see that in Rome, too.
Oh,
to circle back.
To circle back, right, to the original question. So, but when did this shift? I mean, when I was growing up, we read a lot of literature. Mm-hmm. I ended up getting my BA in French literature.
Nice.
Reading in French. Yeah, but I remember reading lots of books. Yeah, starting in 2nd grade. Yeah. I remember so did that stop? Like in public schooling?
It has now. And I support students. I work for a writing center out of New York. So in the tri-state area, I support students with their homework. And you see them, they're reading, but they're reading more contemporary works. They're not reading classics. If they're reading classics, they're taught very surface level. Like, let's find metaphor, let's find simile, and find very surface level
that
themes.
Was my experience. I remember that. Yeah. Right. Which is why we hate it.
Yeah. And so when I'm supporting students, I have to do what they say. But when I get my freedom to teach the students, we dive into character motivation. We dive into what's keeping that character. What is blocking that character? So that's the adversary. That's interesting. What is the theme? What is this work trying to tell us universally about what it is to be human? And those are the things we explore. And they don't do that. They don't want to go that deep anymore. It's too hard.
Well, I feel like movies used to do that too. Yeah. We watched Scrooge, A Christmas Carol, this last Christmas. Yeah. And I was like, wow, what a powerful story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously it's in your face, but everything you just said, like, what does it mean to be human, character motivation, what's missing? Like, absolutely. There it is.
And I've done read alouds with my students of A Christmas Carol in December. So I just read it aloud to them, and we talk about these things and what each ghost means and what Scrooge ultimately learns. And he learns to be human, right?
Yeah.
Compassion, empathy.
And this is what literature was. Right? Like, I love to read, but once in a while I love reading just like trash fiction, or not like the erotic
too.
kind,
I
but like
read a lot
the
of-
fantasy
yeah.
kind. I've been reading this one fantasy series because it started off really good, really deep, great character development. And now you can just tell the guy got famous. He has a team of writers that write each
Yeah.
character out. There's woke elements in there. I'm like, what is this? Like, this isn't
Yeah.
what I signed up for 5 books ago. But case in point is that that's, I think, all literature used to be, because it was such a big deal to write and print a book and distribute it. Like, it had to have substance. It had to be powerful enough.
But it's also was their only entertainment,
Right.
right? These stories, that was their television, that was their TikTok, that was their Snapchat. I don't even know what social is popular anymore. I'm on Twitter. That's pretty much it. But whatever it is for the kids, they didn't have that. This was their story, like reading aloud. Jane Austen read her books aloud to her family as entertainment. And her friends. At 16, this was what she was doing. That's why she's a great storyteller.
Right.
Right?
Well, it's like, the classic, like Native Americans or any indigenous tribes.
Yeah.
They're on the fire, you tell stories. That's the entertainment.
Exactly. And I mean, you can go back to Homer and the Greeks, right?
Right.
He just wrote it down, but we know he's not the original author. These were stories probably dating back to Mycenae, which was before the Greek Dark Ages, when he wrote it down.
There was another thread there from before we went on the air, but I'm not going to bring it up.
Uh-oh.
So back to fall of Rome.
Okay.
What
Okay.
else? Yeah.
So much. So I got militarization, ideas, debasement of currency.
Oh, right.
yeah. So
yeah.
finances.
Like chipping the
Shaving.
edges,
well,
right?
that's why, coins have that serrated edge.
Yeah.
So you can't shave them.
So you can see if they chipped it.
Yeah. That dates back to where they were actually silver. Now they're
Right.
just, tin or whatever metal.
I read this book called London. Do you know
yeah,
that
yeah,
author?
yeah,
And he's done a
yeah.
bunch.
Yeah.
But it's like a 1,500-page book about the history of London, but it's like in
Fascinating.
fiction. Oh, it's such a great read.
Yeah.
And from what I know, historically accurate.
Yeah, he's a great historian.
But I think chapter 2 or 3 is about some guy in Londinium, like the London during Roman times.
Yep.
And that's what was happening. I think
Shaving.
that's what he did. They were counterfeiting. They were doing
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And then, the first coins were in Lydia, and they used electrum. And electrum is a alloy of gold and silver.
Electrum?
Electrum.
That's where they got the
Yeah.
wallet name from?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so the first Lydian coins, and they had, you could measure how much gold versus silver. So there was a percentage. And the first coin makers shifted that percentage. So it was less silver. So they debased their electrum in this metal, and they had to figure out how to standardize it. And so the coins became worth nothing because the emperor or the leader was trying to like pull one over on his people. But they figured it out because gold is heavier than silver.
Wow. Interesting.
It's just really interesting,
There
this
was-
whole history.
Yeah, sure. And this is probably in your Shells to Satoshi book
Yep.
as well. Quick
Yeah.
shout out
Give
to
a little
your
shout
book.
out to my book.
Well, no, we can keep diving into
Yeah.
that. In fact, let's go back to Rome when we get there. But
So there's Christianity, there's militarization, there's finance.
well, real quick,
Okay.
yeah, I just wanted to talk about the Renaissance in Florence.
Oh, yeah.
I read this book called Medici Money.
Oh yeah,
I forget the author,
I
but
love the Medici. Yeah.
yeah, well, that whole story about how only the upper class could use gold,
Mm-hmm.
and then the lower classes had to use whatever else it was. And then whoever the money changer in charge of the money people were, they would be doing that shaving and stuff.
Yep.
And the lower classes just had no idea they were getting robbed in all these different ways.
It's true. And I mean, even the first paper money in China, you had the deposit houses that started cheating people. And that was actually because they were lending out more than they actually had. So, which we see in banks all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not
Fractional reserve.
And I always tell people as a historian, we don't do anything original. We're not that cool as humans anymore. Everything
We
is
just do it
probably
at-
already done.
It's
We
just at a bigger scale now.
yeah.
Of
And we know more about it because of technology, and we're all in each other's business. Yeah. So it's fascinating.
So after Christianity, militarization of government, and
Economics.
then financial economics,
Those are like the main, like the big three. There's also
which we see all across our society
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
So in a way, those three you could attribute to cultural mores or the cultural
Mm-hmm.
foundation, your values, and then the government, the role
Mm-hmm.
of the nation, the power of the state, and then what's the last one? Money. So
Yeah,
those are like the three
economics, yeah,
big,
the
the
big
three
things,
big
yeah.
realms here.
Yep. And with the government, you start seeing emperors come in with these new codes, like the law codes. So the Theodosian Code, for instance, he's the one that said we are now Christian and we will now persecute anyone who is not Christian. And that's when and he pulled out a whole new law code. So it's like these draconian codes come in, and you see that now too, right? The first day of a presidency, and I don't care what side you're on, the first day their hand has to hurt from all those executive orders, right? So they're coming in with their new codes.
Right. Interesting.
And I had a conversation recently with someone, and I was like, yeah, Trump is Theodosius at this point in my mind. That's why I'm not in America anymore. I walked away. My family goes back to the Mayflower. We fought in the Revolution, my ancestors. I won't be there anymore because it's gone. It is so far gone. It's not coming back.
Wow. Bold statement.
Yeah.
What year was Theodosius? What's his name?
Theodosius.
Was he the last Caesar or?
No, there's some emperors after him. 476. No, that's when Rome fell. Yeah, early 5th century. Yeah, no, I think the code is around 476.
So pretty close to the end.
Yeah, pretty close.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think Trump.
For like the mid 400s. I can't remember the exact date of the code. It's like 450, I think.
Yeah, we laughed about it the other day because it's like I think a big sign of the end of the empire here is the elected leader of the people pumping and dumping his shit coin.
I'm 100 years off. He's in the late 4th century, not the late 5th century.
Okay, but in the scope of how long the empire was,
Rome only lasts for another 100 years after Theodosius. That was
right. And Rome had, I guess when we look at it historically, it had a pretty. We think it had a pretty like cut and dry end when it kind of just the power. Can we talk about that? Like
in the West, it did.
In the West,
the Visigoths come in and they take over the West. In the East, Byzantium goes on until the 12th century.
So Byzantium was an extension of the Roman Empire, or a different version of it.
So the capital went from Rome to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. Which is a great. They might be giant song about that.
Istanbul, Constantinople.
It's very catchy. I played it in class.
Wait, so that was the Romans that moved the capital? When was that? When was that?
Constantine the Great, and I loosely say the Great. He moved the capital to the east, and before that, they had the Tetrarchy where they split Rome because it was too big. They had east and west. So
what year was that? Roughly
270s, 280s.
Okay, so about 200 years before the fall of Rome, Rome split.
Yeah, well,
so the Rome in Italy fell in 476, but the Rome that's the other half of Rome.
Byzantium is the Eastern Roman Empire, and it continued. And the church also split pretty early,
like Orthodox and Catholic, basically.
Yeah. So and that was a lot of it was over iconoclasm. And my research specifically is in early Christianity and the sort of influence. We're going all over the place. So,
there's a greater picture. There's a greater picture here because it leads us to Bitcoin, it leads us to El Salvador. Yeah. So I think it's all. I think it's good to know. Plus, it's really interesting. I think.
Okay.
So 200 years before Rome falls. So what I wanted to talk about though is the Eastern Roman Empire kept going. What happened in the West? Because this might be something we need to think about, right? What happened in the West, in Europe, for example, when Roman Empire fell? Who was in power? What was it like for people to survive? What was the money? Because I think in a broad way of looking at it, you can just imagine that people will just grasp for power wherever it lies. And then, regular plebs will fall under some umbrellas of power. And then new structures form until a new civilization emerges.
And we see this, it actually happened in ancient Greece too. Like pre-classical civilization of Greece, we see Mycenaean civilization and Greek city-states, Troy and all those things, those wonderful city-states that are mentioned in Homer, they really flourished. And then there was a decline. And then we have the Greek Dark Ages. And then we have the Middle Ages, which are also called the Dark Ages. I don't like the term Dark Ages because we have some amazing things that come through. But what happens is that it's no longer a centralized one power. You start having little groups of power. So you have like Charlemagne in France and you have different people come in different areas, and it becomes more of an agrarian society. So the Middle Ages, we think of the fiefdoms, the high on the hill, the castle, the lord, and then all of his farmers that have to pay him before they can take any of their own. And so we have these little fiefdoms all over Europe. So it splits.
Yeah. Which in return, they got protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And then you had the argument that was still better than what we got today, the neo-feudalism.
And then you get the knights, right? And, King Arthur and the knights, and it's all romantic. And then you have this great poetry, and the knights go fight the crusades for religion, but only the first crusade. Everything else, and even the first one, you can go back and when you study it and you read the primary sources, you're like, yeah, religion was a front. This was all about power and territory and wealth.
Like the Knights Templar?
Crusades. Well, just the crusades. Yeah. All of the different crusades, particularly the latter ones. But people kind of just go back to these agrarian way of living, I'm just going to worry about my farm and feeding my family.
And so then eventually things started to re-centralize.
Yep. And that's the Renaissance, a rebirth.
Yeah, when we learned about it in France, it was like l'Académie Française, like they unified the language, because France alone, and think of Spain, Italy, all of Europe, this one big country we look at as, that's France, had hundreds of languages inside. Yeah. And then back then you could walk from village to village, region to region, and actually learn the new language as you go, because the shifts and sounds and whatnot come. Yeah,
it's true. And that's how it was all across Europe. And even, Italy wasn't unified until the 19th century.
Right.
Think about that, right? Yeah. That blows people's minds.
Germany wasn't Germany earlier 19th century, or was it before that?
Well, the Austrian Empire and the Prussian Empire. Yeah.
But was Germany part of the Prussian Empire? It was? Okay. Yeah, so that's Italy is fairly new.
I just taught my students last night about communism, and they used the USSR in the reading. And one student's like, "What's the USSR?" So I had to pull up a map. Okay, it originally was these 14 countries that we now see separate, but it was all together. And I was in high school when the Berlin Wall fell, and when the Soviets I was right after. That was right around my senior year, right after my senior year of high school. That's how old I am. So I remember that, and I was telling them what that felt like and how amazing it was to live through that. And I've now seen parts of the Berlin Wall, and it still makes me emotional. Knowing that what came before that, and how people in Eastern Germany and East Berlin lived. Checkpoint Charlie. That was reality that I grew up with, right? The Cold War. You were scared. It was a threat that you grew up with. And I don't think kids today can even imagine what that would be like.
Well, imagine growing up in Russia during that, or in the USSR. Go read the Gulag Archipelago. It's crazy.
And it's funny because I'm teaching these kids the units on communism, and most of them are Chinese living in the tri-state area. And we're talking about Chinese communism, and I'm telling them about Mao.
In Tiananmen Square.
Square. And they don't know that history.
Right.
It's fast. It was really... I was like, okay, I feel like I have to I'm very honest, and I don't keep things from my students, but I also wanted to be gentle, because it's very upsetting if you start learning the millions of people who died and how they died.
Well, just like as an American, it's really upsetting learning about what the U.S. government did to all the Native Americans, and more. But
and we can't. It's like Hadrian. We can't control them, so we're going to build a wall. Well, in the U.S., we're going to kill all of their food source. We're going to decimate the bison.
Yeah, it's super sad.
It is.
Yeah, I guess a classic story of power.
And it repeats over history, and that's when you have to know your history.
So where are we now? We're here in El Salvador, obviously. It's 2025. Trump is president up in the United States. I
would have lost that bet, by the way, because I knew too many people in healthcare and academia, and I would have sworn that they would have had more sway. So I would have lost that bet that he was going to win.
You thought he was going to lose?
Mm-hmm. Because
that's how strong the media narrative was against him.
Well, no, I get information from the teachers' unions and things like that. I'm still on some listservs, and I keep myself on them to keep the pulse of what's happening. And I was surprised. But that flyover country came. I guess they showed up.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Amish, right? It was kind of a landslide though. That's what the whole thing about it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe we can talk about politics in a little bit, but let's talk.
We don't have to.
Let's wrap up this Fall of Rome part of the conversation. So where are we at today as far as we see the signs, the writings on the wall? In your science fiction opinion, what do you think we should expect in the next 10, 20, in the next 100 years?
I think we're at Theodosius, but I think things happen a lot quicker in the modern world because of technology and communication and how things can unravel and how things can change and turn on a dime now for the first time in history.
Yeah, so maybe what took 100 or 200 years back then might be 5 to 10 years today.
A few generations, maybe a couple generations at most.
So what do you see?
I really want to, I'm Pollyanna, if anybody knows that reference. I like to be an optimist. I like to be hopeful. I really hope we return to an agrarian society.
Oh.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to think about slowing down, putting our going in, and you see Bitcoiners trying to do these citadels and people trying to build I'm just going to go and buy some land and farm and grow my own food and worry about my family. And that mindset, at least amongst people that I know, you see that becoming more and more popular. And I think it's great. I think we should take responsibility for our own lives, not rely on the government like people do now. And I think, go focus on having a family and having children and raising them with values and morals in a smaller life. Get out of the cities. Cities aren't good.
No, they're not.
I grew up in a small town. And I moved to a city when I was in 4th grade after my parents split. And I lived in cities all the way up through decades into my adult life. And when I was, after we met, so I was in probably my 40s. My husband's sitting next to me, so I'm looking at him for information. I didn't want cities anymore. I felt like I needed to get back to my roots of living in a small little cow town. And I still feel that way. Here in El Salvador, I live on the beach. I think about living in the city for convenience, but I don't know if I could do it. I could live in some rural mountain town, but then I'm such an introvert reader that I'd probably never have any social things, and that might be bad too.
Yeah. This is the closest to the city I can be, and it's pretty much because we have kids. Yeah. Which could almost segue us into another part of this conversation, which is, we're here so the kids can go to a school with values that my wife and I share. And we're like, okay, this is great. And I'm not opposed to homeschooling. I'm just not in a place right now where that's going to happen. I think maybe when they're older and they're they're toddlers, right? Yeah. It's not, and when I can teach them programming and computers and stuff, I'll be stoked to homeschool, right? Teach them AI. But for now, that's not in the cards. But that's why we chose to live here. So I guess we could talk about El Salvador for a little bit. What do you see in the education happening here, especially in terms of the Bitcoiners and expats community?
So I think the expats struggle. The education, the local schools are not great, but they're not great anywhere in the world. If you look at the standards of education and you look at there's an international test that most countries participate in. It's called the PISA, P-I-S-A. And you can look at the actual test and you can see they don't test as rigorously as they used to. The SAT entrance exam for colleges no longer has a writing component. I graded AP World History exams for almost 15 years. And from the time I started to the time I stopped last year, you see the standards. A student can have a thesis statement in a phrase in the first or last paragraph. They don't care anymore about standards. They used to have a world history class for the AP history. It's now modern world history. All they care about is this modern stuff, and a lot of it's revisionism. They're teaching Howard Zinn, which is a totally revisionist history. And
they're teaching Howard Zinn in public schools?
Oh gosh, yes.
Because when I was in college, I discovered Howard Zinn, and I was like, oh wow, this is the real history. This is the stuff they don't tell you.
But no, I think Howard Zinn is a revisionist, and it's wrong. And I will argue with that to the end of the world.
I would love to hear about that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what are we talking about? Like a people's history of the United States or other stuff?
The people's history of the United States. It is inaccurate. It is revisionist, wish fulfillment, not based in primary sources and not based in a good historiography.
Wow. Okay.
It is indoctrination. It is a Marxist indoctrination.
So Howard Zinn's a psyop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that doesn't surprise me. I look back at like all the stuff I was into in college, and like, wow, half of it was all a
It's a
psyop.
Marxist history of the United States is what I call it.
Wow, but an inaccurate one.
Well, if you're looking at it through a Marxist lens, that would be inaccurate because that's looking at it through victim and oppressor, and that's the only lens, and there's no nuance, and history is nuanced. Humans are nuanced, and that's also what's missing in our world. You're either this or that, and I say I'm very black and white, but I also appreciate nuance.
Right.
There's always more to the story, so triangulate your information, and he doesn't. He looks at it through one lens, which is postmodernism at its best, looking at it through a particular lens to tell a story that you wish fulfillment upon history. Sorry.
Okay, back to El Salvador. So public schools aren't very good anywhere.
No. And so there's the public school option. They're in Spanish. So that's a thing.
Which is kind of a perk.
It is.
Because even if the education is poor, your kids can learn Spanish and they get that cultural experience of interacting and learning how to adapt.
And you don't have Marxist education. You don't have things. You don't have wokeism here. And so it's going to be better if you're against those things than it would be in, say, the United States or in parts of Europe. There's also private schools. They're horrendously expensive. There's a British school, there's a German school, there's a French school, there's an American school. They're going to be using curriculum more closely related to those countries. And I'm against the education in those countries because of the indoctrination happening. I wouldn't send my kids there. Plus, they're super expensive. They're not getting a great education. There are places like Acton Academy, which is a Montessori school. It's STEM focused. I think it's a great school. I think it's one of the better ones here. But I think that you need to spend a little more time on reading and humanities. So if you want to augment that yourself, that's great. But I think it should be done. And there's, it's not that they don't teach them how to read and write, but they focus a lot on the STEM. And I get that, why that is in technology.
Do you
world
think
that
that should be done though at such a young age? Well, not that STEM necessarily needs to be at such a young age either, but I think I got a lot more out of literature when I was older, just because my mind was more developed, for example. I had more experience as a human or something. Like, do younger children, like, because Acton Academy, for example, only goes to 10th grade.
Yeah.
So, like, up until a certain point, like, what should kids be learning? Like, if it's not STEM, like, do you think at such a young age they should be reading literature like that?
Yeah, but they shouldn't be reading Dickens because they can't understand it.
Right.
They don't know those words. They can't even look them up in a dictionary. I'm a classical educator. I believe in what the Romans originated over 2,000 years ago, the Roman trivium. You have a grammar phase, you have a logic phase, and you have a rhetoric phase. And you teach things at conceptually what the children can understand. So you teach things in basic concepts. And then you repeat that with a little more complexity. And then you repeat that again with even more complexity as the brains develop, because our brain development is the longest in any animal on the planet. And so it takes us longer. I grew up in farm country. If you've ever seen a cow or a horse be born, they're standing up within minutes, right? They're pretty much boom, boom, and then they're standing up and they're walking away, right? And we don't do that. We have a very long gestation period. We have a very long brain development period, and that's okay. But we need to respect that. So for me, teaching young kids very complex concepts, like even recycling, they cannot, the first grader or kindergartner, 6-7-year-old, they can't understand conceptually what that means. So it's even that is indoctrination. And so that's okay if that's what you believe in, but I think parents should have that say, not the schools. Mm-hmm. And so I believe in a classical education where you introduce concepts where they can understand, and then you repeat it as their brain develops. So for instance, let's take Shakespeare. There's some really great, very basic things that just introduce Shakespeare things, like even board books. There are like these little Shakespeare counting books. So you can say one drama mask, and then the next page is like one globe theater or one theater, and it'll have a picture of the globe. And it's counting, and all they're really seeing are the pictures of different things associated with Shakespeare. Those are those really like board books for toddlers. And then you can read them aloud stories that are interpreted for younger children. Charles and Mary Lamb is a great example from like over 100 years ago. And they interpreted these stories. And then they can read the junior classic version when maybe they're 3rd, 4th grade. And then, you just keep repeating. By the time they read the original work in history or in high school level, they know it. They know the story. They're familiar and they can get through it because it's not something in this really weird language that they have no idea, and it's confusing for students. Shakespeare should also be read aloud. I mean, this is meant to be performed. So you should perform it as a family, like do a table read as a family, if that's what you want them to learn. And so not only is it important to teach kids at the level that they can understand, it's also important to take that responsibility. And I'm a decentralized education person. I think if you're going to decentralize your money, great. If you don't decentralize your family's learning, it doesn't matter. You've just given your kids' brains to someone else. And I'm not okay with that. So you chose a school. You're comfortable with that. You can go in and vet those teachers. You can go in and say, nope, I'm pulling my kid out for that week because we're not learning that. That goes against our values. But that you are doing the hard work, right? That's proof of work. You're going and vetting that school. And you're saying, I trust you with my child. If you just put them on the bus to public school, have you done that? And in LA, they feed kids almost 3 meals a day if they need it. So parents no longer have to worry about breakfast, lunch, and at some point, sometimes dinner if they're in after-school programs.
Yeah, well, that's what I was kind of going to say is that a lot of public school is just like free daycare for people. And in a fiat society where you're struggling to make ends meet, like that's great.
I get that 100%. And that's
but at what cost?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a Bitcoiner and a decentralized education person. And I know families have to have 2 incomes in a lot of places, in most places. They need that 2 income. So you know what? You get together with a whole bunch of families and you figure something out. You're like, okay, on Tuesday nights, I'm free. I'm going to deprogram these kids and I'm going to teach them about money. And I'm going to teach them that once upon a time, they were Mayan and they used these little things called cacao beans on the level that they can understand.
Right.
And then when they get to high school, they can read about the Fed and get really pissed off.
Well, so yeah, where we lived in Hawaii, there was a similar homeschooling collective like that.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the people in charge of it were like accredited educators and that. So they had, so it was like a school, but it was really a collective because all the parents gave a day a week or whatever.
Yeah. Or you can all get together, pool your money and hire a tutor.
Right. Right. So is that happening here amongst the Bitcoiners?
Some, but problem here is infrastructure, right? So I live on the beach, so I can speak mostly about that. There are a lot of expats in the community I live in with children, but there's no one place for there to be a homeschool collective. There's in the States, a lot of times they'll use churches. Churches have meeting rooms that are rented out or even offered to families if they're part of their parish for free or very little.
Yeah, because they're kind of like a community space.
Exactly. And El Salvador doesn't have that, right? It's coming out of how many years of civil war? And I'm not faulting El Salvador. It is what it is, right? It's just that doesn't exist here.
Yeah,
so how do we get
El
around
Salvador
that?
doesn't even really have parks, to bring your kids to hang out. I mean, there's a few. They're not very nice, though.
There's some nice parks, though, too.
Like for kids to play on. Like,
that's
what I mean. Yeah.
No, that
like Bicentenario is nice. Yeah.
For that, you have to go to like McDonald's or Wendy's. They have nice play centers.
You have to go pay somewhere to be outside at a park. Yeah, if it's even outside.
Yeah. I know the Botanical Gardens has a nice children's area. I've been there.
Yeah, we just went, but you still have to pay to get in.
Yeah.
Not that it's expensive.
You have to pay in. Yeah, I think I don't even remember how much it is.
Like $1.
Yeah, $1. Yeah. So, but yeah, you would have to pay.
So I want to go back to, I guess I never knew what that term classical educator, like what it means, like classical education. So would that apply? So basically what I heard you say was that you keep the theme going throughout their whole childhood, but you just get more and more complexity as they get older.
Yep.
So you start off with something simple. Is that not how we learn math, for example? Like
exactly how you learn math.
So math is still being taught in that way?
Well, they've ruined math because they have the new math.
What's new math?
It's this crazy way that they're making you add and subtract, and it's this Korean math formula, and you have to do it this exact way. And if you don't show your work, you get it wrong. Well, for me, my brain works super fast, and I'm not trying to be narcissistic or anything. My brain just works fast. So growing up, I didn't show all my work because I'm 20 steps ahead. My brain just like, boom, boom, boom. I can look at numbers and really quickly figure it out. So I had a hard time showing all of my work. I didn't get marked down on it because I got the correct answer. They could kind of see my reasoning, and if the teacher was curious, they would ask me to solve the problem and talk through it with them.
But I think maybe depends on which level of math we're talking about. But I remember like showing my work from algebra in 7th grade all the way to AP calculus, my 11th grade. Showing your work was like the main thing. It wasn't even about the answer. Like I sucked at calculus. I somehow got into AP calculus and I passed the exam, so I didn't have to do math in college, and I loved it. But like I never got the answer right. But I passed because I knew how to follow the steps that they wanted me to follow. Are you saying that's not a good thing?
At a certain complexity, but even in my algebra classes, I skip steps because my brain can do it, I can do it in my head.
Yeah, like what's the square root of something? It's easy. I don't need to write
like
that down.
Like the formula, or the quadratic formula, I could do part of it, and I didn't get marked down for that. And I never took calculus. I don't want to bother. I went into I loved chemistry. I was in college level chemistry in high school. So I kind of went that route. I can do math. It just didn't interest me. I'd rather go read, Shakespeare or Jane Austen. That's what I loved.
Right. So when did this kind of change start as far as, because like, it sounds like, I'm not sure if what you're talking about, because it sounds like you're about 20 years older than me. So obviously a lot changes in the world in that amount of time. And then I'm 20 years older than my kid. I'm 30 years older than my kids. Right. So the world they're going into is obviously the education world they're going into is obviously going to be very different than the one I was in. Yeah. But I'm just curious if there's even an answer to this. Like, when did this all start shifting? Because I'm wondering how much of the good stuff I got and how much of the, ruined psyop stuff I got.
Really complex. This is an answer I was looking for when I was getting my doctorate in education. Every class I was in was all about diversity. They were more concerned about gender and skin color, and I don't care. My dissertation was on intellectual diversity in higher ed. I used Ayn Rand as my measuring stick on that because they made me use critical race theory. And so I kind of gave them a big middle finger and said, okay, I'll use your critical theory. I'm going to turn it on its head. I'm going to use Ayn Rand as my measuring stick and look at intellectual diversity and ideas, because that's why we're here. I don't care about the other stuff. Like, it doesn't matter to me who you love. It doesn't matter to me what you look like on the outside. And that's just how I grew up. And so I was really, for the first time in my life, I was the rabble rouser in school, because I'm the first, I'm Hermione. I'm in the front row raising my hand every time. And it was the first time that I was the one causing the strife in class. And I got some crazy satisfaction out of it because the system was so broken. And that's when I knew I just had to walk away. So I kind of just got lost on my tangent there. Sorry.
It's okay. Well, unless you have somewhere you want to go. Yeah, no. So we were talking about.
Oh, yeah. Where it broke down.
The transformations. Yeah. What did it break down?
I studied, and I kept on having to go back further and further and further and further. So I was like, okay, so maybe it was in the 1960s with Johnson, with the ESCA, the first time the government really got involved in handing out money for schools to control them. No, let's go back. Okay, then we have John Dewey. Okay, no, let's go back. It's Horace Mann in the 1850s. So we can go back to him, where he brings in this Prussian idea. But in the modern world, in the 90s, there was a South American theorist, Paulo Freire, who said that schools need to be places where children learn to be activists. And you have a massive shift. And if you look at how things really shift, and you start seeing in postmodernism more of those kind of critical theories where, feminist theory, queer theory, they then go into where everything is oppressor or oppressed. He pushed for that, and it spread like wildfire. Really? And you can see a massive shift as a result of that in educators first, and then the curriculum. And since I would say within 10, 15 years, it just spread like wildfire. And so the teachers' colleges latched onto it, all disciplines. And now, pre-Trump, I guess, this term, I don't know what's going to happen with like the National Science Foundation. They're funding studies to look at the white masculine power in physics. That's the crap that it's our taxpayers as Americans. And I still
What does
pay
that
taxes.
even mean?
Exactly. Or all those dead white guys that I celebrate as heroes from Western Civ, they'll like the National Endowment for Humanities is pouring money to destroy anything of the greatness of Western Civ. And that's why, going back to what I said earlier about nihilism, that's why I say that culture is nihilistic, because they don't want to just like lift up their own ideas. They want to tear everything around them down. They're more interested in tearing down than lifting up. And that's nihilism.
Mm-hmm. So what makes Western civilization so great? Like, we obviously know a lot of answers of why it's not great, but what makes it so great in your view? I'm not saying that's your thesis here, but I'm saying, like, what's the counter argument to that nihilism?
Beauty. Go read a great piece of literature. Go look up the great books, that series, and pull something out, the ideas. So going back to the Greeks, right? They celebrated beauty of the human form. They celebrated stories. They celebrated heroes. And yeah, they were misguided because they thought thunder and lightning was Zeus throwing down, like being angry. But they
did they really think that though, or is that storytelling? You know,
there's storytelling. And so if you look at any culture, I mean, I have a background, I have a master's degree in history and in anthropology. So if you look at cross-culturally, humans around the world, no matter what civilization, they have to explain the unexplainable. And this is pre-science, pre-enlightenment.
Right.
So they're trying to figure out, shoot, my tree just caught on fire and whoa, it's now on my house and my house is on fire. How did that happen? Well, I guess there's some guy in the sky and he's pissed off. Sure, we'll believe that. I don't know if they fully, but that was part of their culture, and it was just part of what they believed. And they worshipped. There were temples to all of these gods. So there's some sort of belief because they are bringing offerings. So they are spending their time and energy on getting something to give to the god. So there's a belief system there. And of course, they had the oracle and they had mystics and all these other things too. So it's not just the gods. There's a belief system there.
So the Greeks admired beauty.
Yeah, and you see that over time until the modern world. Mm-hmm. And then you start getting these art movements. We'll just go with the visual arts.
Real quick, though, rewind. Did we have a lot of beauty, between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance, for example?
Absolutely.
Like
in the Dark Ages. Look at those Gothic cathedrals.
Oh, that's a good point.
Look at the stained glass. I mean, even some of the literature in that time period. The Carolingian Renaissance from Charlemagne was an amazing time. He wanted his people to be educated, and so he had this renaissance of education.
The thing about the stained glass, I've read this in Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception, is imagine you're in the Dark Ages and you're a peasant. You're outside, it's cloudy all the time. You're Northern Europe, you're a farmer, there's just dull colors everywhere. And then you go into the cathedral, and then there's the stained glass with all these bright, like almost neon colors with the sun shining through. You never get that kind of stimulation before. Then you hear the sounds of the organ or whatever, and it's echoing throughout the chamber. And then there's the smells of the inside. It's like the synesthesia, like it's taking over all your senses.
Yep.
And then they hit you with these sermons about, you're going to hell if you don't believe in Jesus and all this stuff. So it's like, I mean, maybe they didn't understand it because back then, didn't they preach everything in Latin?
They would have, but and that would have been the language. And there were it would have been in Latin. There probably were some local churches that would have had the common vernacular, but the stained glass, it was their that was their storytelling. That's how they learned the stories, right? But also that hell and damnation, that's post-Luther. I mean, that comes in after,
Well,
we don't have that in.
Well, forget the hell and damnation.
But there is the obedience, and there is
exactly. Or pay the priest class for confession or whatever
indulgences,
it is. Yeah.
And there is, we're all born from sin, and no human is good. I mean, so there is all of that. But the hell and damnation, that stuff comes much later.
So I bring it up just because, we call it beauty, and it's beauty for sure.
Yeah.
I love visiting Europe for that reason. But at the same time, it was also used to keep this power in control.
But now look what's being used to keep control. Can you get anything out of it? No, there's nothing beautiful. Go to a modern art museum and look at installation of art that is making a statement and trying to get you to believe something. It is ugly. It is gross. I have a bachelor in art history, right? So I studied art, and even into my master's in history, I used a lot of images because it was on early Christianity. So there's a big art history component to what I studied. And even if you don't believe in some of these, worldviews or these ideas, you can still see beauty in these things. You can't see that in modern art, in contemporary art. And modern art with capital M starts with the Impressionists, and if I'm going to use the proper terms, contemporary art. Someone slinging meat on a wall to show that they're a vegan. How is that convincing me?
Yeah, art is supposed to touch you as a human. It's supposed to make you feel a certain way. Instead, like you're saying, it's just repulsive and you want to walk away.
It's all about the shock and awe, and forcing people to submit to your views, because if you say anything against them, you'll get canceled. That's not beauty.
Yeah, right. So Western civilization has strayed away from this concept of beauty, fundamentally.
Yeah, I write about it every day on Twitter and Noster. I write a long form post celebrating something that happened on that day from the West, whether it's music, classical music.
Something that happened on that day.
Day. And then my husband turns them into videos. If I'm a reader, he's a video guy. So he's turning them all into these videos anywhere from 3 to 7.5 minutes. You're going to learn something. You're going to appreciate the West.
Why don't we watch one of those, huh?
Sure.
Let me pull it up here on this fancy. Let me see here. Oh, it worked. Great. What's a good one to watch here? So this is on.
You can do Thomas Paine is 4 minutes. Charlemagne, we talked about him. That's a 4-minute one too.
Thomas Paine. I love Thomas Paine.
Yeah,
I sing a song about Tom Paine's poems.
Yeah.
Real quick, this is youtube.com/@classicaleducator. This is you and your husband Joel's YouTube channel. So anyone listening, if we're about to watch a video here, hopefully we don't get a copyright strike.
Thomas Paine.
Here we go. Sounds like we got an AI voiceover here.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Born on January 20. Thomas Paine, born on January 29, 1737, in Thetford, England, was a pivotal figure in the American Revolution and an influential political philosopher. Despite his humble beginnings and limited formal education, Paine would go on to become one of the most important voices in the fight for American independence. After a series of unsuccessful ventures in England, Paine met Benjamin Franklin in London in 1774. Franklin encouraged him to emigrate to America, where Paine arrived in Philadelphia later that year. This chance encounter would change the course of Paine's life and American history. In January 1776, Paine published his most famous work, Common Sense. This 47-page pamphlet was a powerful argument for American independence from British rule. In this pamphlet, he famously wrote, "A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right, and raises at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom."
Can we talk about that real quick?
Subsides.
That's a good quote.
Yeah.
One that needs digesting. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong. Okay, so just saying, oh, that's not wrong. That's okay, because we just do that.
Or just being complacent, right?
By being complacent, gives it a superficial appearance of being right. Yeah. It's
pretty powerful, right?
Yeah.
He had a little, he was very good with words, and he had quite the influence at the time.
Yeah. So, yeah, check that out. Anyone listening, Classical Educator. So these are all from your threads.
Yeah. So I write them, he takes them and uses the images, and sometimes we'll get more images. But it's philosophy, art, classical music, composers. Could be Baroque music. I mean, it's not just the classical period if you're into music. What else? Just stories about history, literature. So anything that I think is interesting on that day. Sometimes we're celebrating someone's birthday. Like, hey, Thomas Paine was born on this day. Look what he did. It's my way of educating the world simply in just, a post every day, and trying to show value in these things that are being shunned in education. And that that are being canceled, really, in favor of sexualizing children, the woke agenda, even putting in modern literature or modern books instead of these classics, because they were written by somebody who looks or loves something, a certain way. And for me, a checkbox on a DEI, survey doesn't make it worth children reading. It's okay. Like, there's great works written by African Americans. I'm going to celebrate one of my favorite poets is Phyllis Wheatley. She's a former slave and brilliant, and was brilliant in her time. And so when appropriate, because they've earned it through their work, through their ideas, absolutely celebrate it. But don't just do it because somebody loves a certain type of person or looks a certain way. That is completely vapid and so surface. And these things are so much deeper than that. And that's what I celebrate.
So maybe to wind this up, we can kind of connect some dots from the beginning of the Fall of Rome conversation. Do you perhaps believe that if we as a society did start appreciating beauty more again, teaching the next generation, our history that we should be proud of because of our respect and admiration and creation of beauty, do you think that could fix the path we're on? Do you think that could help society as a whole crawl out of this fiat paradigm? Do you look at it as a solution? Or you mentioned earlier, like, some things are too late. Could this be a way for the phoenix to rise again?
I think we have to go through a dark age. I think individually, that's why I do what I do. I only work with Bitcoin families outside of the writing center. I work for the States. I won't teach other families, and I vet families more than they vet me now. Because I won't hit my head up against the wall anymore. I won't filter my curriculum, which is steeped in these classics from Western Civ. I won't do it anymore. I'm just too old to compromise that kind of stuff, and I feel so passionately, and I know the outcomes of what it means to teach a classical education and teach it with the greatness of Western Civ. So I don't compromise that anymore. I think that people need to take responsibility of their own lives and back away from the government. And that's going to lead us into not the dark age like we saw in the Middle Ages or even the Greek dark ages. I don't think it'll be that decentralized ever again. But I think people need to live a smaller life and really start their own, sort of empowering themselves to take control of their lives, their money, their family, their children's minds, their work, not just show up at a job and that steals your soul, or not just, work somewhere and collect a paycheck, but really value, like, understand this is my time and energy that I'm spending, and that's all I have as a human to earn anything. That is what we have. That is our product, time and energy. Think about how you spend that and be reflective. And to do that, we're going to have to decentralize. And I think that's great. And then maybe we'll see what comes out of it. That's where the phoenix rises.
Well, I think that's a great way to close off. Thanks for joining me, Deanna.
Thank you for having me.
And Joel. And so for anyone interested, you can follow Deanna as Classical Educator on YouTube and X.
X, it's, just search for classical_educator.
Classical_educator. And then shellstosatoshi.com is your book?
Yep. Shells to Satoshi, The Story of Money and the Rise of Bitcoin. It's not a Bitcoin book. It touches on Bitcoin. It's a history of money and how humans invented and reinvented money over time to figure it out. And so far, Bitcoin's been the best solution.
Okay. Yeah, I was hoping we would talk a little more about that, but
yeah.
I think we'll just pick up the book and we'll save it for another conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, Shell, and then I don't even know how to begin, but spelling your tutoring Lyceum.
Lyceum Tutoring,
yeah.
Lyceum.
There's a link
tutoring.
on your Twitter account.
Yeah, there's a link on my Twitter account. And it's named Lyceum because I'm an Aristotle fangirl.
Right.
Yeah, and that was the name of his school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thanks for having us. Thanks for coming on. And thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.